Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome to our TACSM lecture series. Our guest today is Dr. Natalie right here. He received his PhD in exercise physiology at the University of Alabama and has been with the University of North Alabama for the last 13 years or so. And what else can I tell you? We like deer hunting. He's from a very small town. And his internet at home is still not very good. And I think we can all appreciate that here as well, right? Especially in our building for some reason. But I'm not going to keep Dr. Green, so here you go. Enjoy. No, I mean,
Not yet. There. Okay, right.
Could you hear me if I did this? In the back, raise your hand if this is good. Okay. Throw a $20 bill at me.
All right, let's try it. I'm not here, for sure. I appreciate being here. This is the fourth university I've been at in 4 days. And I can't say, I thought I was showing some of the fighting moves before me. I thought Alabama was the only place where you got this kind of hospitality. I deeply appreciate it. And you all be proud of your state, the university system, and the people here really well out there. So I appreciate being here. And I hope you enjoy the presentation. I try to sprinkle humor into it, probably because I like humor, probably because there's no problem with laughing at what we do. So, all right, so I got to pose a little bit of fun at Texas. But the reason I can do that is because that level of snow in North Alabama will shut the school down for at least a week. Okay, even though we'll get this in the morning and it'll be about 70 degrees by 2 o'clock, everybody got the tank top. But the kids love it, so it's all good. And I warn you too, if you see a little guy with skis right there, that's me down at the Gulf of Mexico. I tend to get excited about this stuff, and I can talk really, really fast. So if I start talking really, really fast, just wave your hands, slow me down, whatever it takes. I did figure out last night that you guys are the Lions. At UNA, we are also the Lions, and there's your mascot, Lucky. I'm sure you're aware of that. Here's ours. His name is Leo III, and I heard we're actually the only campus in the United States with a live lion on campus. We did have 2, and the female, who was the sister to Leo, she actually died in the last year or so. Now, the only difference in Lucky and Leo is we probably get more calls from PETA because of our line. So, anyway. So what am I going to talk about today? It's perceived exertion and the perceptual model when it's involved with exercise training. The history and the use of RPE, mediating factors. The thing I'm most excited to talk to you about are some of the novel applications. The associate dean and used to be department chair at Carleton State is a former doctoral student of mine. He developed a recovery scale that's perceptually based, and we did that in 2011. I'll talk quite a bit about that, and especially if you're a graduate student, maybe a thesis topic in here if you're paying attention, and if we stick with that, you took it on with it. I will talk a little bit about some misperception as well. If you're not an office man, 1, 2, okay, a few people anyway. All right, so move along. To start a discussion on RPE, you have to really start in the 1960s. Dr. Borg developed the Borg's RPE scale in the 1960s. The original use of the scale was if you're on a treadmill, if you're on a bike, if you're rowing, whatever you might be doing, we could show you the scale and you could estimate your physical exertion with the numerical value. So how hard are you exercising? You might say, well, that's a 13. If we make it a little harder, you probably say a 50, something like that. That's an estimated RPE. Now, there's also a probably not quite as well-known application of RPE where you actually prescribe an RPE. Now, mostly when you go through your general fitness classes, you're taught the 2.8 minus, etc., and then you got a heart rate zone, right? You can also do that with RPE. So, if I got Haley on a treadmill and her heart rate zone, I know is supposed to be 130 to 150, where is Haley? There she is. I got Haley on a treadmill, and her heart rate zone is 130 to 150. When I see her heart rate at 130, I can ask her, Haley, what's your RPE? And Haley would say, very good, 10. Okay? And then after I make it a little harder, eventually the heart rate will get up to 150, and then I'll say, Haley, what's your RPE? She'll say, 15. Very good. All right. So then I would prescribe like a 12 to a 15 for Haley. And you can do that for anybody. And research shows that it's a pretty effective way to regulate your exercise intensity. And you don't have to have a heart rate monitor, you don't have to have a net card, lactate assessment, etc. Now, the guy in the picture there is actually Dr. Borg, the guy that came up with the scale. Believe it or not, we used to see him at the National ACSM conference yearly when we would go. Now, he's passed away since, but a lot of times at exercise times, I think that because of the scientific field, you think, well, it's, that goes all the way back to the Greeks and Romans and way, way old. Fetal exercise physiology is really not that old compared to a lot of studies in academia. I'm going to talk a little bit about how, well, this is when the RPE scale was developed by Borg. There's also a session RPE concept I'll talk about, and then I'll talk a whole lot about the PRS scale, the recovery scale. Now, I think it would have been neat to have been around when Dr. Borg developed the RPE scale, just to get an idea of what the discussions were like, what the data looked like. Like I told you, I was there when the PRS scale was developed, so I'm going to give you a first-hand consideration of that. Now, across the years, a lot of different RPE scales have been developed. You've got one for weight training, so one for biking, one for running. Those are mode specific. Believe it or not, there's pediatric scales. We have pictures of kids versus adult scale. There's gender-specific scales, and then we can take that overboard, all the way up to a blonde versus a brunette scale. But Dr. Robertson, actually a Pittsburgh professor, he wrote a book in 2004 for the practitioner. He did a ton of RPE research. Now, another bit of history about the RPE scale for Steve Gerson is the session RPE. And as much as Haley's exercising, I can ask her how hard the exercise feels, and she can give me a number. After she finishes her workout, I can also wait 20 minutes and I can say, hey, how was that workout on a scale of 0 to 10? And she might say it's 6. That's more of a global rating. It should reflect the whole difficulty of the exercise bout altogether. Dr. Foster published this paper in 2021, so it's fresh off the press about the 25 years of the session RPE concept. Interestingly enough, now, especially if you're looking for a thesis idea, this came about, if you read this article, he talks about how the idea for the scale or using the scale for a session model came up. The kids were coming home from baseball practice, from football practice, from soccer practice, and they would just get in a discussion about, well, how was your workout today? Well, the next thing you know, he started scratching his head and said, you know what, we could go somewhere with that. And next thing you know, he started using the RPE scale. This is the omni-pictorial scale. He starts using that as a tool to evaluate overtraining. Come to find out, it's pretty darn effective. So I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. One of the things that really got me interested in RPE was what mediates RPE. Well, if I got Greg back here, one of the GAs on a bike, and I asked him, Greg, how difficult does this feel? What's your exertion level right now? And he says 7. I want to know what made him say that. If I ask you right now, is it comfortable in here? You would think about the temperature, the light, whether or not it's too bright. All of this feedback from the periphery would allow you to give a perceptual measure about whether or not it's comfortable, whether or not you're hot, whether or not you're cool. The same thing in exercise. What about what's going on with Greg that would make him say a 7 when 5 minutes ago he said a 4? So the mediating factors, what makes you say a certain RPE? This is a slide that I put together back in 2005. I actually got to present with Dr. Robertson and Dr. Foster. And pretty much the RPE scale, it takes into consideration a ton of different factors. You know, I've just got 3 because I ran out of room on my little funnel there. But you can think about how hot it is, how heavy your breathing is, how sore your muscles are. And there's probably 100 or more different things that might factor into RPE. But all of those go into your brain after the afferent feedback from the body, thermal receptors, and everything else. And your brain takes all that, dumps it into a big algorithm that none of us can understand. But because we're divinely designed, it works, and your mouth spits out an RPE. Most of the time it works. Right? There are limitations, but most of the time it works. It's known as a gestalt because it considers a lot of different factors. In my research, and I guess I'm in my 23rd year, and if you count my GA years, you can add 7 to that. So I've been doing this stuff close to 30 years, and in my research, I've pretty much determined the most important factor is the acute metabolic demand, which kind of drives all the others. If your metabolic demand is higher, your lactate's going to be higher, your ventilation's going to be higher, your heart rate's going to be higher, everything else is going to be higher. So there are limitations to it, but in general, it's a pretty effective model. But if you want to think about what drives an RPE, you do have to think about the paradigm. And that's what I mean by that is the situation in which you test it. Now, go back to Greg. Let's say let me pick on Omar for a minute. Let's say I got Omar on a GXP. And every couple of minutes, I'm making it a little harder and a little harder. And I don't like Omar, so I'm really fixing him. If he can't outrun my treadmill, I'm fixing to really hammer him. Every time I make it a little harder, what's going to happen to all the physiological variables? We're going to systematically increase. At the same time, he's telling me it's harder. So, how many of you, if you would raise your hand if I ask this question, how many of you, your daily exercise involves doing a GXP? Not a single hand goes up, and that's not surprising. Nobody does a GXP for exercise day. You go out and run for a half hour, bike for a half hour, you play soccer, do yoga, whatever it is you might do. It's not a GXP. So I kind of figured out we're testing the RPE in a paradigm that's really not highly applied. Most people go out and again, they do some kind of steady state exercise all the time. But if you look at these 2 graphs, this is just an example of how things can be a little misleading. If you look at the bottom left graph, you've got lactate on the x-axis and the RPE on the y-axis. Well, sure enough, when lactate goes up, RPE goes up. So it would be very easy to say, aha, lactate drives RPE. But let's be careful. There are other factors that go up too. Your VO2 on the top graph, your heart rate on the middle graph, and there's another lactate graph. So when your metabolic rate goes up, all these other things go up, so does RPE. But you can say, well, those are the things that are mediating RPE. However, we know what happens to lactate if you go out and run at a steady state for an hour. It'll go up a little bit, and then your body transitions from being a net producer to a net consumer, and your lactate will start to go back down. So I had this idea that if we were to test that RPE and lactate would become uncoupled at some point during exercise. So I think this is the European Journal of Applied Physiology 05. We had people bike for an hour at about their 2.5 millimole lactate. A simple contrast is just a statistical reference. Anyway, so you can see what happens to lactate on the bottom, just like we predicted. It went up and then started to come back down across time. Heart rate went up and it continued to drift. And the devices are talking about cardiovascular drift. Well, we observed it here with the heart rate going up across time. But then look at our RPE. This is overall legs and chest or breathing. What did RPE do? Well, it continued to drift up as well. So look at the 20-minute mark for lactate, where it peaked and started to go back down. And then look at the 20-minute mark for our RPE. It continued to go up. So those measures diverge at the 20-minute mark. So we concluded from this that lactate is either not one of the strongest mediators or contribution changes with time. Because if you just did a 20-minute trial, they're both still going up. So you might reach a conclusion of what is necessarily so. After we did that study, I wanted to know kind of like a soccer paradigm. That's pretty much interval workout. Sprint for a minute, and then you kind of watch, and you sprint for a minute, and watch. So we put people in the lab and had them do 5 2-minute intervals at an intensity greater than their 4 millimole lactate. All the scores are Z-scores, so they're standardized. We did that so we can put all the data on one graph. And what you can see is the dark triangles are lactate measures. So they did an interval and lactate went up. And then lactate predictably just kind of drifted up across time because when you exercise at high intensity, lactate is produced in your muscles. And we're measuring it up here at your fingertips in the calculator sample. Well, what happens is what you produce in your muscle continues to flux out into your blood, and so there's not time for it to go back down in a recovery period when you're doing intervals. On the other hand, if you look at the dashed line and the open circle, that's heart rate and RPE. It looks like a sewing machine. When you're working hard, it went up, and when you're recovering, it went down. Work hard, it goes up, recovery, it goes down. We'll look at the RPE and how tightly it's linked to heart rate, which is a pretty good reflection of your acute metabolic demand. On the other hand, look at how it's tied to lactate, not that much. So during interval exercise, we concluded again, lactate, it's not that strong of a mediator. However, if you've got a real discerning eye, look at that. What happened to our peak RPEs across time? Well, they were kind of drifting up, even in the recovery period. It never came back down as low as it did the first time. So not totally uncoupled, but lactate is not the strongest mediator. So if we were to think about the mediators of RPE, and I just showed you 2 studies, there are thousands out there. No one factor is dominant, although I think there are some that are way stronger than others. Inflammatory drive, VO2, the heart rate. What happens is you get peripheral signals, and basically again, that causes you to say with RPE. The big advantage to RPE is it's sensitive to a lot of different inputs. Everybody knows what beta blockers are. They blunt your heart rate, right? Well, if you're going to prescribe exercise for a person and they're on beta blockers, it's hard to do it with heart rate because that drug has altered their normal heart rate. But you could use RPE. It should still be effective. So it's not perfect. I don't receive royalties from perceived exertion scale or anything like that. But if you look at the literature, it's pretty consistent. It works. Now, fans of this show, try to get a giggle here. We got one smile and a nod. Wow, this is a tough crowd. Anyway, this kind of humor on. Nonetheless, I saw a book one time in Barnes and Noble, and I took a picture of it. I started to put it in there. It said the Book of Answers. I thought, well, that's interesting. But people in academia, graduate students, professors, we don't need answers. You know what we need questions, because that's how we make our living. We do research on questions and don't know the answers to. So anyway, questions are important. I had a question. We got a good idea of what factors mediate RPE if you're doing exercise. I wanted to know what mediates the session RPE. So when Haley gets done with the workout, 20 minutes later, I say, hey, how does that workout, Haley? She said 6. I want to know what makes her say 6. So we started studying what factors mediate the session RPE. And these are some hypotheticals. Some of them do, and some of them probably still need a question mark on. We don't know. But let me show you a few studies where we examine the factors that might impact session RPE. This is not our study, but it's one of the better ones that was done early on. So I wanted to include it. A guy named Stephen Seiler did this. That's his graph over there. Any runners in the crowd that will admit it. I have a couple up here. Runners tend to argue that there's 40 different kinds of workouts. Right? And if you haven't done that, you've heard other runners do. Well, you got your field workouts, your tempo, your long, slow distance, your intervals, your hill repeats, and then you can no more. And I would argue there's only 3 kinds of workouts. You're either below your threshold, you're at your threshold, or you're above your threshold. And all of those you can list factoring in somewhere in those categories. So that's what Seiler suggested as well. And so he developed a study where he examined 12 cross-country skiers, elite, okay, they were Olympic level cross-country skiers. Across 32 days when they were leading up to a pretty big competition, he had 346 47 training sessions. He assessed heart rate and session RPE for every bout, and then in 60 of the bouts, he got lactate measures as well. And he categorized each workout based on the training zones that I just said, below, at, or above your given threshold. But here's what he found. Focus on the boxes up top first. Session RPE work as well as lactate and as well as heart rate to tell you where those athletes were when they did that workout. Now, if I don't have to take a blood sample, if I don't have to have a heart rate monitor, if I don't have to have you palpate, that's an extremely convenient way to assess training. But it has to work. We don't accept something because it's convenient. It also has to be effective. But Session RPE did a very good job. In fact, about 92% agreement. It told you the same thing that the heart rate measure told you. The bar graph shows you pretty much the same thing we decided to follow that with an intermodal study at 2 intensities. So we had people come in and bike and do treadmill work at 50 and 75% on both modes. And we used an isocaloric paradigm. So we had them exercise to the point where they burned about 400 calories per session across the 2 modes. And then we did get Session RPE, and we differentiated the components of the here's what we found. Focus on the bar graph first, and focus on just the Session RPE, the first set of 4 bars. Within the mode, okay, so within biking or within running, Session RPE corresponded extremely well to the heart rate measure. Well, not a surprise, but it also, we collected core temperature. And if you look at the delta T rate down at the bottom, that's how much heat gain the person experienced while they were actually doing their workout. Well, the Session RPE corresponded pretty well with that as well. And I'm going to show you a study in just a minute where I'm pretty confident in saying that the environment, the heat, makes you say a higher Session RPE. If you look at the between mode, cycling versus treadmill, we always got a higher Session RPE for cycling, especially if we differentiated the legs. Now that makes sense. And our resident runners up here, I would tend to guess that if you were evaluating your session, you would think about your legs. I was sitting at Vanderbilt University when I went down and watched one of my students run a cross-country meet. And then wife was just sitting in the stand, and these couple of runners from Vanderbilt or somewhere came up and sat down in front. Of course, I'm eavesdropping on the conversation, so I don't know what they're talking about. And one of them said, how do you feel with that? He said, my legs are heavy. Runners focus on their legs, and they know what heavy legs feel like. I'm getting not. So I tend to think we could differentiate the section. I think we can probably help it out a little bit. But this highlights the contribution of different factors, and I see that as a positive. Okay, so this paper we published in MedScience around 06, 07. Again, I want to know during interval exercise what happened. So we had people do 8 intervals at 90% of their peak, and then we had them do a constant load exercise to hash that, and we had them do that in a hot environment and a cool environment. Now, 32.5, I'm not familiar with Celsius or refrigerator, so it's bumping up around 100 degrees, so we were cooking them pretty well. The cool environment, 21 degrees, low 70s, the big thing you need to remember on this study is the volume of work that these participants did was equated among all 4 trials. Constant and interval, hot and cold, they did the exact same amount of external work. We got heart rate, core temperature, and lactate, and then of course 20 minutes post that session. Let's look at physiological data first. The top graph of the lactate value. Well, we did interval exercise, lactate, it rapidly went up. We did the constant load, it went up, and it kind of planed off, and it really wasn't that encouraging. The heart rate measured on the bottom, we got a 10-minute recovery heart rate at 36 minutes, and then we got a mean heart rate for the whole session while they're actually exercising. And no surprise, when it was hot, greater strain on your heart, greater skin blood flow, like that. But that should not have been a surprise anyway. So what happened to Session RPE? There's your data. So the dark bars are the hot trial, and the open bars are the cool trial. Well, as you can see, in every case, when it was hot, people set a higher Session RPE. Well, that's not surprising. I know it gets hot here in Texas, like Alabama. So if you're walking out the door, and you know it's 90 degrees, you're probably already dreading it. And you get back, sure enough, hey, that was harder than if it's 60 degrees outside, even if you do the same amount of work. I kind of thought that the interval trials would ramp the session RPE up a little more than they did. We did get a significantly greater session RPE for the interval trial, but it was limited to the hot trial. Slightly higher during the cool, but it didn't reach the statistical significance. So again, this kind of highlights that multiple mediators are at play. But I can say definitively, in my opinion, that a hot environment definitely makes a workout more difficult. Which again, that's not terribly anything that's surprising. The lactate is pretty loosely associated with it, so not as magic as sometimes we make it. The next factor we looked at was, does duration affect session RPE? So if you're working out at the same intensity, but you exercise 40 minutes instead of 30 minutes, will that affect your session RPE? Well, we designed a study where people had the exact same workload, 70% of their VO2 max on bike, and they exercised 20, 30, and 40 minutes. We got the heart rate and RPE and lactate and session post. Well, focus on the three boxes with lines on the first. Lactate, no different. Well, they were exercising at the same intensity, just a different duration, so not surprised. RPE overall drifted pretty much like you would expect it, with no significant differences. And then the heart rate almost lay on top of each other. Again, same workload, just different duration, no surprise. Here's your session RPE on the bottom right. Focus mainly on the first one. They pretty much all follow the same landscape, so to speak. Duration really didn't have a big impact. Now you see the bars going up, but it went from like a 4 to a 4.3. Not anything to write home about, but if you look at the yellow line, I inserted that on top of the graph that we actually published. At some point, if that line continues, you extrapolate that out, you would think at some point duration will have an impact. It did in our study. Now the longest trial was only 40 minutes. Now, Foster's study, Foster's paper, but he review article about 25 years of the session RPE. He concluded that duration is a pretty big factor. I am not as convinced as he is, I guess. If you look at the left graph, minutes or durations on the x-axis, and 30, 60, and 90 minutes. Well, if you look at the one that goes 90 minutes, the RPE out there is not a whole lot different than it was up here at 30 minutes. So I don't see it drifting up, even though that was an hour and a half worth of exercise. Now, there's a couple of examples where it does. And that's our data on the right again. And the open diamond is our data and his paper. Again, I wasn't convinced, and I'm still not. But believe it or not, after I was putting this presentation together, I looked at the literature and I found a paper by TACSM. And what he looked at was session RPE, duration, and intensity. So you've got 15-minute bouts and 30-minute bouts at 3 intensities, weak, moderate, and strong. And what he concluded, if you look at the weak and the weak, 15 to 30, no difference. Moderate and moderate, starting to go that direction. But if you look at the strong intensity, 15 to 30 minutes, you see that session RPE went up. So Danny concluded what I was kind of suspicious of is that duration has an impact if the intensity is high enough, but not at lower intensity. So, and probably lower intensity you see an impact if the duration is long enough. So, what mediates session RPE? Well, that's a good question. Lots of different things. I think heart rate, VO2, there's pretty consistent evidence there. Pretty loose association with lactate. Lactate's all over the road. Lactate is extremely hard to interpret, but again, not a bad measure. I'm confident in saying that a hot environment is a mediator. Duration, well, it depends. It's intensity high, I'm sure. Colder work, kind of a loose association there. All right, now, any student athletes in the crowd? You're a thrower, right? That's the deal. Any others? That's good. What was your team? I'm a thrower. Going well? Okay. We can overload people, right? We can push you through the ringer, so to speak. We can create workout programs that will definitely push you past what you're accustomed to and overload your body. That's what we want. The problem is if we push you and push you and push you, eventually we get you overtrained and move backwards instead of forward. Well, that's not what we want. What we need then in that situation, we need to know whether or not you're recovered when you start your workout. Now, it's not hard to know if Haley's supposed to go in and do a workout, or Amy's supposed to go in and do a workout, and we've got this great workout design, and they started, and about half or 3/4 through it, I'm spinning, I can't do this. It's possible that they weren't well recovered. It would have been nice to have known that before we started the workout. But that's a hard thing to do. Effective assessment of recovery is a challenge, okay? And that's what we're about to talk about. You might know who this guy is. Raise your hand if you know who this guy is. Believe it or not, I get very few students who know who Arnold Schwarzenegger is. All right, good deal. Well, this is a novel application that I want to talk to you about. To monitor recovery. How do you monitor recovery? Well, it's not easy, or at least it didn't used to be. We could take a blood sample and assess cortisol. We could do a lot of different, we can do muscle boxing, look at glycogen concentration, or reloading the glycogen. We can look at resting heart rate. There's a lot of, but those are all invasive, those are all difficult, and largely impractical. Well, these guys, Kim and Haskell, in 98, came up with PQR. Now, they made a good effort, and I don't want to be disrespectful and talk down about their study, but what they came up with still wasn't that practical. If you were about to go into the weight room or the track or go out for a run or bike or something like that, and you wanted to know, do I need to modify what I'm about to do because I'm not well recovered? You need to know it, you need to know it right then. Same thing if you're a coach. And what Ken and Hackman had people do is they did a TQR. It's called what they call a total quality recovery. Before bedtime, estimate how recovered you feel. And then there was a long survey, several-page survey you had to fill out. Well, does that sound very appealing to fill out a survey and get somebody to analyze it before you start your workout? It doesn't to me. But what they did is they clarified a need. We need a better model, better method for evaluating how well recovered a student athlete is, or an athlete, or an exerciser of any kind. But we need it before they start exercising, because after they're into the workout, it's too late for me. I'm a coach and my team is run down, and they need a little bit of a light day. I need to know it before I start doing stuff to it. Wow, y'all are hot. Go back and think about my humor. Funny to me. In 2011, we developed the perceived recovery scale, and this is the original study. So when some of you are teaching 20 years from now, you can say you met one of the guys that came up with the perceived recovery scale, because I have every belief will be just as popular as board in 60 years when I'm there. Probably not, but anyway, we wanted to assess recovery, and just like I am very confident that if Greg is on the treadmill and I ask him his exertion, his body's tied to his brain, and so what he tells me is the truth, if he's being truthful. If he can tell me that, we had this hypothesis, he can be able to tell you how well recovered they are as well, especially student athletes, because the brain, they're very attuned to the body. Again, the athletes that in front of me, can my legs feel heavy? That's nothing more than a perceptual measure. Their legs weren't feeling that good, their brain integrated that. Out comes this, my legs. So our thought was, if you don't know how well recovered somebody is, ask them. Ask them and get a numerical value on our scale. So in 2011, the NCR, Dr. Lorenz, again, who was Associate Dean of Paulson State, Texas, he published this in his dissertation. So what we did, interesting design, I think, that we came up with. We want to put people in situations where we know they're recovered, and then put people in situations where we know they're not recovered. Now, if Haley or Amy goes into the weight room and their coach puts them through a huge circuit workout, and we get nearly killed them, have to be wheelchaired back to their dorm, and said, okay, come back tomorrow in 24 hours, we're going to do the exact same thing. That would never be, okay, you can see her face, and she's like, what? I don't think so. It wouldn't work, and you know you're not recovering in 24 hours. If you're recovering in 24 hours, you go to the workout, right? You stand back to the workout. Okay, so we had people come in, put them in a situation where we know they're recovered, and a situation where we know they're not recovered, and basically said, how well do you feel recovered? Now, one thing about student athletes, runners especially, there's been days probably you go out and think, hey, I have to play golf, I'm going to have a good day, and you go out and keep up with practice. And then there are days where your legs feel heavy, but you go out and you have a great day. It's inexplicable. Well, what we figured out in this study was you need to do your warm-up so that you get some peripheral feedback from your legs, your arms, whatever it is you're using. Let your brain feel that, then give us a PRS. It works better that way. What he did, though, he did 30-meter sprints, and basically had them come back and nearly kill them, of course. Had them come back 24 hours later, try the same thing. We knew they weren't recovered. And you have them come back 48 hours after that, when we thought maybe they're recovered, and then 72 hours when we know they should be recovered. Here's our scale. Now, it had some slight modifications to it, but this is the original scale that we came up with. Basically, you look at the verbal descriptors and you say, yeah, I'm at about a 6, I'm at about an 8, or oh no, my legs are heavy, I'm only at 2 today, I just don't think I'm going to have it. And you basically have a number. Now, here's the results. Here's the biggest thing we found. The numbers that are circled is a percentage of time where the people were actually accurate in predicting what was going to happen. So if they were going to get better and they were going to have an improved performance, they predicted that accurately, 76% of the time. Now that's good, but really what I want to know is, are you not going to do as well today because you're under-recovered? They predicted with 85% success. And if you look at all the trials together, 31 and 38, 81% of the time, they got it right. So it kind of suggests to us pretty strong that at least the people we had, which weren't all athletes, people know if they're recovered or not. They know how they feel. And I tend to think it would work even more effectively if you tested an athlete. But they're way more in tune with what's going to go on in their body. Well, we followed up with a couple of studies. These studies were not specifically to test the PRS scale, but perceptual data is easy. I would encourage any of you, if you're doing research, include perceptual data, because it's not like it's a muscle biopsy or a blood sample that's required. Get your perceptual data, and if it turns out to show nothing, then it really costs you nothing to get it. It's easy data to collect. J.K. Davis, who was actually a professor here for a while, okay, he was a grad student in Bama, and then Matt Laurent, and Carlton, they did the first study on drug dehydration affects sprint performance. And then a graduate student of mine, Josh Chan, who is now at Louisiana Monroe as a professor, he did a follow-up study. Same research question, different approaches, but again, I'll just show you the PRS data. Start with JK study. He had people do 3 by 8 sprints, 40 yards each. Okay, so 24 40-yard sprints. Dehydrated them by way of exercise in the heat the day before and fluid restriction. And then have them come in 6:30 the next morning. So hey, go home, sleep it off, come in the next morning, we'll do our sprint. All right, you don't get anything else out of this. Realize this, totally independent of the PRS scale or any other measure. We tend to think dehydration has a big impact on aerobic athletes, and it does. You don't run as well, you bike as well, but don't show up at the weight room. We have data on that too. And don't show up to sprint or do repeat sprints dehydrated. It's going to impair your performance. You see the top graph over there, that's the sprint performance. So the black bar is the dehydrated trial, the dash bar is the hydrated trial. Now, you're good for one sprint if you're dehydrated, but after that, it goes downhill. Don't show up dehydrated to do your sprint. Now, keep in mind, they did the same amount of work, 3 by 8. Okay? They all did 24 40-yard sprints. The work volume was the same. But look at the bottom graph. Those are your acute RPE. How tough were those 8 sprints? Even though they did the same amount of work, and the work was harder, or the work was slower for the dehydrated trial, they said it was easier in the hydrated trial. So, same amount of work, but it felt easier. So that's a positive outcome. What about the PRS? Okay, well, look on the right-hand side first, the session RPE. Okay, they did the same amount of work, but when they were dehydrated, what happened? It was harder. In fact, probably 1.5 units harder. And on a 10-point scale, that's quite good. The PRS data is on the left. So people show up, they do a warm-up, and then we say, how recovered do you feel? When they were dehydrated, they gave us above a 7. When they were, when they were hydrated, they said above a 7. Which means, hey, I feel pretty good. I think I'm going to do pretty well today. When they were dehydrated, they said, nah, I'm only around 5. And lo and behold, look at your PRS and look at how well that study, Dr. Glenn. Now, the difference here, I'll go ahead and look on the left-hand side, that's the sprint performance. Dehydration did not change their sprint performance that much. But the explanation is JK had people exercise the day before to dehydrate them. We had people sit in a horse trough in hot water and just sweat. And about every 30 minutes, we pull them out, put them on a scale, towel them off, and put them on a scale, evaluate how much they lost, and basically work until we got them down to about 3.5% dehydrated. Send them home, give them 500 milliliters of water, and say, come back the next morning and we'll do our sprints. On the hydrated trial, we did the same thing, but every time they got on the scale, and we figured out they had lost 300 milliliters, we have them drink 300 milliliters. So if you showed up weighing 180, you went home weighing 180, and we would continue to give them water overnight as well. So again, the sprint difference wasn't that much, but same work, and look what happened to the RPE. Everybody said it felt harder. So you were doing the same amount of work, but because you were dehydrated, it felt more difficult. So that's a meaningful outcome. The sprints are repeated up there, just so you got that reference. But let's look at the perceptual data. The RPE about 1 and about 2, dehydrated on the top and hydrated on the bottom. So 6.1 to 5.0, 7.1 to 6.3. So about a unit difference, and that's 10% on the 10-point scale. The session RPE changed by about 0.7. Again, it's upwards of 1 unit. It's pretty meaningful. But look at the PRS. It looks like, to me, it's the most sensitive of all the measures. If people show up dehydrated, they know it, and they're going to tell you, hey, I don't feel that great today. And sure enough, it shows up in their performance. Now, we passively dehydrate them and have them sleep the night and come back to their sprints. That is a situation where it's about optimal. Student athletes tend to show up on Monday pretty well hydrated because they had possibly Saturday, but for sure Sunday to rest and rehydrate and hopefully get their brain straight and recover really well. So they should show up Monday well hydrated. What happens though, progressive dehydration is this. You exercise Monday, the coach works you out and you dehydrate. And you don't quite drink enough. But you come back Tuesday and you do it all again, you dehydrate. And Tuesday you don't quite drink enough. And then Wednesday. So what happens is by Friday, you have systematically dehydrated yourself across time to a way greater degree than you did in one session on Monday. So we found one session that PRS picked up on the dehydration. I'd like to test this in progressive dehydration paradigm. I tend to think it would show up over and over and over. It would progressive with less slow recovery, and it would show up in their receptive models. Not our data. Lorentz on this study, but I'm not. A University of Tampa saw our scale and decided they wanted to put this test with some markers of muscle damage and soreness. And so there's the workout they did over there. You don't have to read it, just know or try to pretty much kill them with a weight workout. And rightly so, because we want to know if they're well recovered. And then they measured the creatine kinase, testosterone, cortisol, and well, it shouldn't surprise us. If you're sore, that is evidence of muscle damage, by and large. Well, if your muscles are damaged, then you aren't well recovered. And subjective measures will a lot of times correspond with each other. So this is not a surprise that the soreness value links up pretty well with PRS. Creatine kinase on the left, testosterone on the right. Now the data is pretty scattered, and that might be something. I'm not so sure about that. Well, creatine kinase tends to be all over the road as a measure. Huge standard deviation. Well, that makes the statistics kind of difficult to find these relationships. That didn't really bother me. The testosterone can be the same way. And in fact, I think that's what too. What the Sikorsky Inhibitor Society was, they concluded the PRS does a very good job reflecting your readiness to come out and do something, your readiness to do a workout, and potential performance. They also concluded it does a pretty good job of reflecting muscle damage, and of course it can link to soreness. Now, if you understand multiple regression, that's where multiple factors come in to predict a single variable. I tend to think that the fact that we got somewhat lower R values on testosterone and 6K is evidence that multiple things factor into the PRS scale. I can see that as a positive, not a negative. So, Now, this is a study that, again, we weren't testing the PRS scale, we were testing muscle points, but we always include the PRS. This is a thesis that was published from UNA. She had a nutrition background, this young lady did, and she said, I've heard, Dr. Green, that magnesium reduces muscle points. She said, I'd like to test that in my thesis. I said, well, let's do it. So, away we go. We basically had a magnesium group and a placebo group. And we had to do eccentric bench press. And it was very, very effective in creating performance, let's say it that way. We had to do their soreness rating 24, 36, and 48 hours, just a subjective scale. And then we had to come back and we did reps of failure to assess the performance. Interesting too, we did a nutritional analysis because if you have plenty of magnesium in your diet, our thought was it's unlikely that more is going to be anything other than just expensive urine. So we wanted to do a nutritional analysis. And she also knew that student athletes very, very often their diet showed not enough magnesium. So anyway, we did a nutritional analysis, and here's what we found. There's our soreness rating. It was a delta value, and it wasn't fancy statistics to get what we wanted. It was just the way we felt best to analyze it. But what you can see here is magnesium reduced soreness by and large in the groups from the aggregate mean. Here's our data. I want you to focus on the highlighted area. The total reps to failure, magnesium and placebo. So if you look at the magnesium group, total reps to failure, 28 to 30.6. So we picked up about 3 reps. Is that a big deal? Well, it is, especially if you're doing 3 sets and 6 or 8 exercises. That's a lot bigger overload. So the magnesium supplementation resulted in an increase in reps versus the placebo. They pretty much stayed at 32 the whole time. And then look at the PRS data, those are on the bottom. The placebo group, they increased by 1 unit. Okay? Not meaningless, but if you look at the magnesium group, they went up about 2.5 units, 2.2 units. So we got twice the recovery response change in the magnesium group. And it corresponded with their performance as well, and the soreness. So this study, Dr. Levine is on this one. It's actually in review, and I didn't get their permission to include it. What they've done, and I think this will probably get published and come out in the next 9 months or so, they use a counter movement jump and mean bar velocity on a back squat protocol. They familiarize people, and then right there where that yellow area is, they pretty much get a fatiguing back protocol, back squat protocol, and then they had to come back in 24, 48, 72 hours, same model before. And here's what they found. So look up across the top where it says mean recovery score. If you were 60 to 75% recovered, 70 to 75, 75 to 80, all the way up to 95 to 100% recovered. And then the PRS scale is over here. So look what happened. As you were closer to 100%, which is what you want, what happened with the PRS? It went up. So the PRS reflected in this case your level of recovery. Now, one thing too, though, if Haley tells me she recovered at a 6, and Annie tells me she's recovered at a 4, that doesn't necessarily mean she's more recovered than she is. These perceptual scales are highly individualized. What I want to know is, what is Haley's number on a regular basis, and is she deviating from that today? If she tells me that she's a 7, and she comes in today and she says she's a 5, I'm pretty confident she's not as well recovered as she is. She may come in on a day-to-day basis and say 5, and today she says 3. Well, I'm pretty sure she's not as well recovered as she is as well. So it's almost how much is somebody deviating from baseline. And we need to extend our study and look a little closer at that. And here are the 11 subjects, the individual data from the study on film. If you look, the black solid line is the PRS. I recovered in the other 2 data from the other 2 lines are the counter movement jump and the mean bar velocity. So that's the performance data. Well, look how parallel those lines are in almost every case. If they did not perform as well, the PRS was predicting they're not doing well. Interesting, too, look at number 2. I think that person dogged the test. They never really did, their performance never really suffered, which makes me think they probably didn't put the effort out that they should have. But look at what the PRS said. They basically said, yeah, I dogged the test, and thought, yeah, I feel pretty well recovered. Well, congratulations, you should. You didn't do anything, you came in. Look at number 8. Now, I don't know whether this person went on a drinking binge or what, but 72 hours failed to get them back recovered. Well, that's okay, look at what the PRS said. Guess what? They predicted, hey, I'm not going to do as well as that. For whatever reason, I'd like to know what they actually did. By and large, if you look at every case, the PRS track extremely well with their performance. Same study is today presented in a different way. This emphasizes the individualized approach. So this is nothing more than what percentage recovery you are in the PRS, and you'll know as the percentage goes up, so the PRS does too. Even though some people may go from a 4 to a 7, others may go from a 5 to an 8. It's still the delta value. So, perceptual model, perceptual measures are an integrated response. And so, what goes into your brain from the afferent feedback that causes you to spit out a PRS? Well, we're still studying it, but I think hydration is almost a no-brainer. I think we can put that in the bed in almost all cases. Soreness, if you're sore, you probably want to tell us you're not as well recovered, and that would be truthful. The others is a fruitful area of research possible. Now, again, focus on within a person, not among people. And this is just a schematic of, again, we're doing a thesis project. Keep people up all night and have them exercise and see how that affects their PRS. So, what can you do in the future? Well, figure out the limitations of this scale. That's actually the updated scale. Sleep disturbances. When your professor's going to give you an exam and you stayed up half the night, well, you're stressed out about the exam and your sleep deprived. My guess is you're not going to perform as well physically under those conditions. I'd like to know will the PRS reflect that. I would hope it would. Glycogen depletion, your students, and you work 10 jobs, and you've got other obligations, and so a lot of times your nutrition is not what it needs to be. Will that show up? Also, we'll look at how sensitive it is, how much of failure to recover will show up in a perceptive scale. Wow. All right. There will be no questions. Any questions? That's it. That's what I've got. I appreciate it to be here, and I will try to take any questions that you got. When Mark said, Doc here, so he's got this thing. This is the best.
Dr. Green, when you were looking at some of the mediators, one being hydration, are there any particular studies that will talk about whether water or some of the other things that we see on TV, like Propel or Gatorade or Powerade, being more or less effective than using water?
That's a good question. We studied hydration quite a bit in Alabama. We had 8 chambers. What we decided was this. If you let's start this way. If you go and you have a bag of pretzels or some wings or something like that, it's got a lot of salt in it, that makes you what? Thirsty. Okay? Because there's a lot of salt in it. Salt is one of the main ingredients in Gatorade. Gatorade is called the thirst quencher when really it's the thirst quencher. Water will quench your thirst, but if you're being dehydrated because you're losing sweat, the last thing we want to do is quench your thirst. We want to prompt your thirst. That's why Gatorade is slightly more effective. It functions a little bit at the level of the kidney, but the big function of Gatorade is just makes you drink more. So if you want to get cheap Gatorade, make Kool-Aid and put a little salt in it and there you go. That said, if you are more well hydrated, I think it wouldn't matter where it came from. Dr. Brooks out of California, I think he's in Berkeley. He wrote one of the 8-year textbooks. I heard him one time in a seminar on hydration. He said, look, the kidneys are exceptional at what they do. So much so we can live with half of what God gave us. you take a kidney out, you switch it by really well. If you give the kidneys plenty of fluid, they will sort it out. The only thing the kidneys can't handle is not getting enough fluid because they can't create it themselves. So water, Gatorade, Propel, all these things, they're all effective in hydrating. The big thing is just make sure you drink enough. Another thing we did at Alabama was this, with the deal with hydration, and I think we show up here. We had people dehydrated for about 2%. I was actually a participant in this. And then drink the volume of fluid they lost in the first 30 minutes. And then we had to do the exact same thing and drink the same volume of fluid across 4 hours. So we kind of stick it across 4 hours versus drinking it all in one big bolus. And what happened is when you drink it all in one big bolus, your kidney says, whoa, this is way more than I need. You create a bunch of urine and you only retain about 50% of what you drink. Whereas if you measure it out across 4 hours, we retain about 75% of what we drink. So I think the PRS will show up in that case too. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think the answer would be whatever got you hydrated or whatever hydration status you're at, I think that's what would matter, regardless of where it came from. That's in my guess. I don't have data to say that. We did this for 2011 and $30 each time to happen 04 or 08. I wish it had it still. It would have been. Other question? He actually had, we had some data looking at gender bias and gender difference. Females tend to have a greater pain tolerance. That's very consistent in the psychological literature. I think that's, I've got to guess that's why that happens too, probably by design. But I have seen multiple times a big burly guy or an athlete, particularly male, on a treadmill or doing something for us in the lab and telling us 6 and 7 on the RPE scale. In adults here, an attractive young lady walks in and all of a sudden his RPE drops to a 4 and he's doing the same amount of work. So I think there's an ego bias, but I think there's possibly 50 within the bias. Doesn't matter. Probably not, because go back to the individual. If I tell you I'm recovered at a 5, and that's pretty much that's my home base, and I come in and tell you a 3, I'm off. If any on the other hand comes in, she tells you a 7, and all of a sudden she tells you a 5, she's off. So it's really within the individual that matters. I think we probably will be within the individual. Females seem to be tougher on speaking like yes, ma'am.
For your studies, what makes you decide on which test to use? Like 3x8 friends, or how do you decide?
Well, Dr. Lorenz, that was his dissertation, and so I kind of said, hey, come up with something where you know they're not recovered. And so he decided to do a sprint protocol as opposed to like an endurance run, something like that. Honestly, we could have put them in almost any paradigm we wanted to. I'm a little, I wish the Sikorsky study would have done a full body workout. Because again, just like people don't do a GXT, people don't go in and do 2 exercises. Okay, that's it. They do a full body workout, 6, 8, 10, 12 exercises, 3 or 4 sets. Now, one of the studies actually did do that. I think we need to put it in a little bit more of the applied setting, like some of these student athletes might go in and their coaches put them through on a regular basis. We just needed something where we knew they were going to be recovered, and sprints were pretty easy, they were cheap. We had a big green space called the Quad at Alabama's campus. That's where we did the sprint. So it was convenient, really, for that answer. But again, we need to put it in more paradigms. I would think, too, on that note, we probably could differentiate the PRS. Runners would probably ought to say, how well do your legs feel recovered? Because that's where their focus is. For resistance trainers, we might say, how well does your upper body feel recovered? And we might find a little bit more precision if we differentiate it, but we need to do those studies too. So that's a good question. Others? Like during exercise? Or after? The question was, have we seen any differences in like nutritional intake before, during, or after exercise? We have not. Now, well, magnesium, say that because what we did is we feed them to death and gave half of them magnesium and half of them placebo. That's the only nutritional intervention we've done. And it was a supplement, it wasn't actual nutrition. But again, I would say my guess is data. Anything that helps somebody become more well recovered, I'm hopeful that the PRS will show up. Again, I'm not getting rolled about this, but we want to know the truth. And if it works, it's similar to RP, it's a very convenient model to use. I do know this, the head of, I think it's research and development at the Seattle Seahawks. I was on a Zoom call with him about a month ago. They're using our scale for their professional athletes. Here's why. They also don't want to do a muscle biopsy or a blood sample and have to analyze cholesterol. They need a convenient measure, but it's got to work. Okay? It's got to be good data. You're never better than your data. Bad data is better than worse than having no data at all because that's a lie. So I can't make decisions based on lies. I need good data. So anyway, I'm hopeful that the Seahawks continue to use it. I'd love to get their data because they should have a ton of it because those are pro athletes.
How much magnesium do you know was the right amount to give each person?
Okay, good question. We basically looked at the RDA. I think it was 600 milligrams. So it wasn't an individualized dose, Omar. It was just, here's what the RDA is. So we're going to make sure you get it. Now, if you're getting more in your diet, great. The nutritional analysis showed, I think about 3/4 of those people were actually deficient. And so what happened was when we, and I've got, if I could go back to that there or not. There it is. Actually, I don't have, it's a different graph. I'm doing another presentation at the other universities, and I've got a different graph there. We use 600 milligrams, and because I think that's the RDA. The young lady, she had a nutrition background, so if you're deficient, that should take care of you. And if you're getting a little bit, then you should be the 600 for wherever you're getting out of the diet. So that's how we pick that out. And with magnesium, it's so good that if you are deficient, supplement, kind of like a vitamin D supplement, and other things, if you're deficient, a lot of times the supplement can fix it. So, and in that study, incidentally, we found that people, the people who were tested, who had plenty in their diet, which wasn't in the oven, magnesium didn't do much for their story. So if you get it out of your diet, you don't need supplement. The problem is most of us don't do enough in our diet. So, the 600 milligrams, and I think that was already, that's an interesting. Okay, any thoughts on the PRS scale versus RA? Very good. That's a good question. Anytime you have an objective measure where you're actually getting something versus a subjective measure, there's always a chance that it may function slightly better. The challenge would be getting the HRV going on rapidly. You've got 100 football players. You have football players. You know, the HRV on our you could. That's more challenging. Siler study where he did lactate heart rate on those pro athletes, 347 sessions. I would confidently say the section on data can put that in the whole thing. So it is a chance to heart rate regularly with one day. But what I would want to do is let's test it against the PRS, and unless it's way superior, we measure it.
Any other questions? Last chance. You get your chance there.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. If you have not received one of these, please pick them up here. You fill them out now or in 5 minutes? Like now. Do it now. Basically. Fill out these forms, please. Did it work now? Yeah. Okay.
because it was 2 days ago. Yeah.